Have you ever had a secret that wasn't yours to keep? A secret so heavy it felt like carrying a mountain on your back. My sister, the beautiful bride, thought she knew all my secrets. She had just shared one with her entire wedding party. A cruel lie designed to make me small, to make everyone laugh at my expense. The room filled with chuckles as I stood there, my maid of honor dress feeling like a costume for a fool. But she didn't know the real secret. She didn't know who was sitting at my table. And she definitely didn't know he was about to stand up. My name is Connie Morales, and I am 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been lived in the shadow of my younger sister, Brianna. She was the sun, and I was the quiet little moon that only came out when she was asleep. I was the responsible one, the one who worked 2 jobs to help our parents, the one who put her own dreams on hold. This wedding, this big fancy party, was another one of her dreams I helped make come true. And if you've ever felt like you were invisible, like your love and sacrifice meant nothing, then I need you to please, from the bottom of my heart, hit that subscribe button. It would truly help me feel like I'm not alone. Brianna stood there, glowing in her $1,000 dress, her new husband, Mark, beaming beside her. She raised her champagne glass. "And a special toast to my big sister Connie," she announced, a wicked little smile on her lips. "She's always been so dedicated to her work. She even turned down a proposal last year to focus on her career. Can you believe it? Let's all wish Connie luck in finally finding a man who can compete with her spreadsheets." The room erupted in laughter. My face burned hot with shame. There was no proposal. There was never a proposal. She had made it up to paint me as a lonely, work-obsessed spinster. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into a million tiny pieces. My eyes scanned the room, looking for an escape, and they landed on him. Mr. Alistair Finch. My boss. He was a quiet, serious man in his late 60s, the owner of the company where I'd worked for 10 years. He rarely spoke more than a few words to me, so his presence here was a mystery to everyone. Brianna had scoffed when I told her I invited him. "Why would you invite that old man?" she'd whispered. "He'll bore everyone to death." I invited him because, in a strange way, he was the only person who saw me. He saw my hard work. He saw my dedication. He saw the person I was when my family wasn't looking. The laughter died down, but the whispers continued. I could feel their eyes on me, a mix of pity and amusement. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I looked over at my parents. My mother gave me a weak, apologetic smile, while my father just stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. They would never stand up for me. They never did. It was always easier to let Brianna have her way, to let her shine, even if it meant dimming my own light until it was almost gone. What would you have done? Would you have run out of the room crying? Or would you have stayed? Then, something impossible happened. A chair scraped against the polished floor. Mr. Finch, the quiet old man Brianna had dismissed, was standing up. He was a tall man, and his presence suddenly filled the entire grand ballroom in Charleston, South Carolina. The air shifted. The remaining whispers died instantly. Every eye in the room, including Brianna's, turned to him. His face was calm, but his eyes held a fire I had never seen before. He looked like a king who had just discovered a traitor in his court. Please do me a favor and comment where you're watching this from. I truly believe that if you share your home with me, a special blessing of strength will find its way to you and your family this week. Brianna's perfect smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed her face. She looked at the DJ, motioning for him to play some music to move things along. But no one was looking at her anymore. Mr. Finch took a slow, deliberate step away from his table and began walking toward the small stage where the microphone stood, waiting for the next speech. He moved with a purpose that silenced every thought in my head except one. What is he doing? He hadn't said a word, yet he had already taken complete control of the room. He was a man used to being listened to, and my sister was about to find that out. He reached the stage, his hand calmly reaching for the microphone. My sister's new husband, Mark, took a step forward as if to stop him, but a single cold look from Mr. Finch froze him in place. Brianna's face was now pale, the color draining from her cheeks. The power she held over everyone just moments ago had vanished. It had been transferred to my boss, this mysterious old man who had watched me cry at my desk after my family took my savings for the wedding deposit. He knew things, but I had no idea just how much he knew. Mr. Finch tapped the microphone once. The small sound echoed through the silent hall like a gunshot. He didn't look at the bride and groom. He didn't look at me. Instead, his gaze settled directly on my parents, who were now looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. He cleared his throat, and his voice, calm and powerful, filled the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Morales," he began, his tone polite but icy. "I was not on the schedule to speak tonight. But after that last toast, I feel it is my duty to say a few words. First, let's talk about your retirement." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father looked like he had seen a ghost. The guests murmured in confusion, looking at each other, wondering what a guest had to say about the parents' retirement. But Mr. Finch wasn't finished. He held up a single folded piece of paper in his other hand. His eyes finally moved from my parents and locked directly onto my sister, who looked like she was about to faint. "And Brianna," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone that sent a shiver down my spine. "Before you cut that beautiful cake, I think all your guests deserve to know where the money for this wedding really came from." The silence in the room was so thick you could feel it pressing on your skin. A single fork clattered onto a plate, the sound echoing like a church bell. My boss, Mr. Finch, stood there holding that piece of paper like a judge about to read a verdict. My sister Brianna's face was a frozen mask of disbelief, her perfect makeup unable to hide the panic in her eyes. My father, a man who always puffed his chest out with pride, looked small and shrunken in his tuxedo. My mother just stared at her hands, her knuckles white. Everyone was waiting for the explosion, but Mr. Finch was a patient man. He was going to light the fuse slowly. My mind flew back 1 year, to our small kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. I was showing my parents the brochure for a little storefront I wanted to rent. It was my dream to open a small bakery. I had saved every single penny since I was a teenager, tucking it away in a shoebox under my bed before I finally opened a savings account. I had nearly $50,000. It was my whole life, my entire future in that one account. That's when my father sat me down, his face full of worry. "Connie," he said, his voice heavy, "the factory is having layoffs. Your mother and our savings are gone. We might lose the house." He explained that Brianna's wedding was already planned and deposits were due. Canceling would humiliate her. "It's just a loan, Connie," my mom had whispered, tears in her eyes. "We will pay you back every cent once we get back on our feet." They promised me. They swore on my life that they would pay me back. So I did what I always did. I gave them everything. I drained my savings account, the one I named Connie's Little Bakery, and handed over my life savings. My dream could wait. My family needed me. Have you ever given up a dream for someone you love, only to have them throw it back in your face? Now, standing in this grand ballroom, surrounded by flowers that cost more than my first car, I saw the truth. My sacrifice wasn't a loan to them. It was a solution. I wasn't a daughter, I was a bank. The beautiful ice sculpture of 2 swans in the corner probably cost what I made in a month. Brianna's dress, the one she said was a bargain, could have paid my rent for a year. I felt a cold anger replace the shame I'd felt just minutes ago. It was an anger I had never allowed myself to feel before, and it felt surprisingly warm. Brianna shot a panicked look at our father, her eyes screaming, "Do something." I now understood why Mr. Finch was doing this. About 6 months ago, I was at my desk, long after everyone had gone home. I was on the phone with my mother, crying because I had to ask them for a small part of my money back just to fix my car. I heard my dad in the background yell, "Tell her to get a second job. Brianna's wedding can't have any budget cuts." They thought I couldn't hear. The next morning, Mr. Finch left an envelope on my desk with enough cash to fix my car and a simple note that said, "A bonus for your hard work. You've earned it." He never mentioned it again. He knew. He had known all along. Mr. Finch's calm voice cut through the silence again. "Mr. and Mrs. Morales, you told your daughter Connie that your retirement was gone. That the factory closing left you with nothing. You made her feel responsible for your future." My dad opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Finch held up his hand, and my father fell silent. He then unfolded the piece of paper. Even from my table, I could see the logo of my father's old company at the top. The guests leaned in, trying to see what it was. It was a document, an official-looking one. "This," Mr. Finch announced, his voice booming slightly through the microphone, "is a copy of your father's pension statement, dated 1 week before you asked Connie for her life savings." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It seems the factory didn't leave you with nothing. It left you with a full pension, valued at just over $500,000. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was louder than the laughter that had humiliated me. It was a sound of shock, of judgment. My head swam. $500,000. They had $500,000 and they took my little dream, my shoebox money. My parents didn't deny it. They couldn't. The look on their faces was all the confirmation anyone needed. My father stared at Mr. Finch with a look of pure hatred, but also fear. My mother started to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking. The guests were no longer looking at me with pity. They were staring at my sister and my parents with disgust. The power in the room had completely shifted. I was no longer the sad, lonely sister. I was the victim of a terrible lie, and my family were the villains of the story. Mr. Finch wasn't done. He turned his steely gaze on my sister, who looked like she wanted to run. "So you see, Brianna," he said, his voice softening just a little, but in a way that made it even more dangerous. "Your parents had plenty of money. They just didn't think your dream wedding was worth spending their own retirement on. It was much, much easier to spend Connie's." He let that sink in, twisting the knife that was now firmly between my sister and my parents. The perfect family image they had built for years was crumbling to dust in front of 200 people. But it was his final words that made my own heart stop. He folded the paper and placed it back in his jacket pocket. He looked directly at my father, his eyes as cold as ice. "But a lie like that, that's not even the most desperate thing you did, is it, David?" My father's face went completely white, as if he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Finch continued, "You see, a few months ago, your father came to my office. He didn't come to talk about Connie's great work. He came to ask me for a personal loan. And he offered me something very, very interesting as collateral for the money." He paused, looking around the room. "He offered me his house. The house that Connie believed he was about to lose." The world stopped spinning. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the grand ballroom. My father offered Mr. Finch our house. The little blue house on Maple Street where I grew up, where I had my height marked on the kitchen doorframe, where my mother planted roses every spring. That house was my only real home, the only place I felt safe. And my father, the man who was supposed to protect it, had tried to use it like a poker chip in a game I didn't even know he was playing. I stared at him, but I didn't see my dad anymore. I saw a stranger wearing his face. Suddenly, a screech of feedback ripped through the silence. Brianna had stormed over to the DJ booth and snatched a second microphone. Her face was red and blotchy, her beautiful bride makeup streaked with angry tears. "Enough!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Get this crazy old man out of here. Security. He's a liar. My father would never do that. He's just a bitter employee trying to ruin my perfect day." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Mr. Finch. But nobody moved. The security guards just stood by the door, watching like everyone else. Brianna's power was gone. She was just a girl in a white dress screaming into a microphone, and nobody was listening. Mr. Finch didn't even raise his voice. He waited for her to run out of breath, his calm presence making her look even more unhinged. When she was done, he simply asked a question, not to her, but to the entire room. Why would a man with a $500,000 pension need a loan so badly he'd risk his family home? He let the question hang there, a new piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. I saw the gears turning in the guests' minds. They were no longer just watching a family fight. They were trying to solve a mystery. Why would he do that? The lie wasn't just about the wedding money anymore. It was so much bigger. My mind flashed back to that day in the kitchen. I remembered my father's hands trembling as he held his coffee cup. He told me he couldn't sleep at night, worried about the bills, worried about losing the house. "This is for the family, Connie," he had said, his eyes wet with what I thought were tears of sadness. "To keep us safe." Now I realized they were tears of a gambler, a liar who was scared of getting caught. He didn't just take my money. He took my love, my trust, and my sympathy, and he twisted them into a weapon to use against me. He used my own heart to fund his lies. The shame that had burned my cheeks earlier was gone. In its place was a cold, clear feeling. It was the feeling of waking up from a long, bad dream. I looked at my family, my weeping mother, my furious sister, my cornered father, and I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel pity. Felt nothing. It was like looking at a photograph of people I used to know. The connection was broken. The love I had poured into them for 28 years had finally run dry, and the ground beneath my feet, which had always felt shaky, now felt solid. I was standing on my own, and it didn't scare me. Mr. Finch continued, his voice steady and calm, as if he were giving a report at a board meeting. "David didn't tell me he was laid off," he explained. "He told me the truth because he was desperate. He took an early retirement package. But he had already lost a significant portion of his pension in a bad investment with a so-called friend. He needed the loan not to save the house, but to invest in another sure thing, to try and win back what he had lost. He wasn't saving his family. He was chasing his losses." The story was even uglier than I could have imagined. My father had the money, lost it, and then came to me. I wasn't plan A. I was his backup, and then it all made sense. The hushed phone calls he would take in the garage. The letters from banks he would hide before my mom could see them. The sudden weekend fishing trips he would take by himself. All the little red flags I had ignored because I wanted to believe my family was perfect, because I wanted to believe my father was the good man he pretended to be. I had been living in a house of lies, and I was the only one who didn't know it. The question now was, how long had my mother and Brianna known? Mark, the groom, slowly stepped away from Brianna. He looked at my father with pure disgust, then at his new wife, whose face was a mix of rage and humiliation. He had married into a family of strangers. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. He had been tricked too. The perfect family he thought he was joining was a complete fraud. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a party built on my stolen dreams and my father's desperate secrets. The foundation of their marriage was a lie, and it was cracking before they even had their first dance. My father finally found his voice. It was a low, angry growl. "You have no proof," he snarled at Mr. Finch. "You didn't give me the loan, so you have nothing. It's my word against yours. This is my daughter's wedding. You have no right." He tried to sound powerful, but he just sounded pathetic. He was like a cornered animal, baring his teeth when he knew the fight was already lost. He was trying to grab onto the last piece of his crumbling authority, but it was slipping through his fingers like sand. He thought he still had one thing left. He thought he still had his home. Mr. Finch gave a small, sad smile. It was the kind of smile a teacher gives a student who just doesn't get it. "That's where you're wrong, David," he said, his voice dropping so low that everyone had to lean in to hear him. "The final secret was about to be revealed. I didn't give you the loan, that's true. But I was so concerned about Connie's future, and what you might do next, that I made a few phone calls." He paused, and his eyes found mine, and in them I saw not a boss but a protector. I called the bank that held your mortgage. They were very happy to hear from me." He turned back to my father, whose face had gone completely gray. "You see, David, the house isn't yours to gamble with anymore. As of last Tuesday, the mortgage is paid in full. And the deed belongs to me." A heavy thud echoed through the room. It wasn't a plate this time. It was my mother. She had fainted, slumping from her chair onto the plush carpet in a heap of beige lace. For a second no one moved. It was like a scene from a movie, frozen in time. Then my father scrambled to her side, but his eyes weren't filled with worry for his wife. They were filled with a burning, terrible hate, and they were locked on Mr. Finch. The perfect family portrait was not just cracked, it had been set on fire, and we were all just watching it burn to ashes. Ignoring our mother on the floor, Brianna charged towards me. Her face was a twisted mask of fury, the beautiful bride replaced by a screaming stranger. "You!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She was close enough that I could smell the expensive perfume I had bought her as a wedding gift. "You planned this. You were always jealous of me, jealous that I had Mark, jealous that I was getting married. You brought that old man here just to ruin the one perfect day of my life." The words were meant to be daggers, meant to wound me, but they just bounced off. I wasn't that weak girl anymore. I stood my ground and looked my sister right in the eye. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. "Your one perfect day, Brianna?" I asked, and my voice was calm, so calm it scared even me. "This one day cost me my entire future. This perfect day was paid for with the money from my bakery. The dream I told you about since we were little girls. Do you even remember that?" A flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe just surprise, crossed her face before the anger returned. But it was too late. I had finally said it out loud. The truth was out, and it felt like breathing for the first time. My father, realizing my mother was just hiding with her eyes closed, stood up and pointed a shaking finger at Mr. Finch. "This is illegal. You can't just buy a man's home. I'll see you in court. I'll take everything from you, you hear me?" He was trying to sound powerful, like the king of his castle, but his voice trembled. He was just a scared little man who had been caught, trying to roar like a lion. The 200 guests were my father's jury, and they had already found him guilty. His reputation, the one thing he cared about more than anything, was gone forever. Mr. Finch didn't even flinch. He looked at my father with an expression of deep disappointment. "Actually, David, you were months behind on your mortgage payments. I have the bank records right here." He patted his jacket pocket. "The bank was going to foreclose. You were going to lose the house anyway. The only difference is, now it belongs to someone who won't gamble it away." Every word was a hammer blow, knocking down the last wall of my father's lies. He had been drowning, and instead of asking for a life raft, he tried to pull me under with him. As I watched this unfold, a single question echoed in my mind. Why? Why would a man like Mr. Finch, a wealthy and powerful business owner, care so much about me? About my stolen savings? About my family's house? I was just his assistant. A good one, yes, but just an employee. This was personal. This was something more. I looked at his kind, serious face and realized I knew nothing about the man who had just saved me. What secret was he holding? What was his reason for becoming my unexpected hero in this nightmare? Just then, a new voice cut through the tension. It was Mark, the groom. He walked slowly to the DJ booth and picked up the microphone Brianna had thrown down. His face was pale. "To our guests," he said, his voice shaking. "I am so sorry. I am sorry you had to witness this. I am sorry I was part of this lie, even without knowing it." He turned and looked right at Brianna, who was staring at him in horror. "And I'm sorry, Brianna, but I cannot start a life with someone whose happiness is built on the pain of her own sister." He set the microphone down. "This marriage is over." Then he walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Brianna let out a cry that was pure agony. It was the sound of her whole world ending. She sank to her knees, her $1,000 dress spreading around her like a broken halo. Her perfect day, her perfect husband, her perfect life, all gone. A small, dark part of me felt a rush of satisfaction. But mostly I just felt empty. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. We were a family, and we had destroyed each other in front of everyone. The guests, not knowing what else to do, began to quietly slip away, leaving us in the wreckage. My father stood frozen, defeated. My mother was still pretending to be unconscious. My sister was a sobbing heap on the floor. The party was officially over. Mr. Finch walked slowly through the silent room and stopped in front of me. The air was thick with unspoken questions. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a kindness I had never seen from anyone in my own family. He reached into his coat, and my heart beat faster. What now? What other secret was he about to reveal? He didn't pull out another document. He pulled out a single familiar key on a worn heart-shaped keychain I had made in art class when I was 8 years old. It was the key to my front door. The key to the little blue house on Maple Street. He held it out in the palm of his hand. It seemed to glow under the ballroom lights. "David was wrong," Mr. Finch said. His voice so soft only I could hear it. "He said I couldn't take a man's home. He's right. I didn't. I just made sure it went to its rightful owner." He gently placed the key in my hand. "It's yours, Connie. The house is in your name." The key felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than a piece of metal should be. It was the key to my childhood, the key to my future, and now it was the key to my family's fate. It was a weapon and a shield all in one. My father, seeing the key pass from Mr. Finch's hand to mine, let out a noise that wasn't human. It was a roar of pure rage and disbelief. He saw the house, his kingdom, his last possession, slipping away forever, and in that moment, he saw me not as his daughter, but as the thief who had stolen it. He lunged forward, not at Mr. Finch, but at me. His hands were like claws reaching for the key. "Give me that," he screamed, his face purple with anger. "That is my house." For a split second I froze, the little girl in me terrified of her angry father. But before he could touch me, Mr. Finch stepped between us. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a calm, unmovable wall, and my father stumbled to a halt. The look in Mr. Finch's eyes was not angry. It was filled with a deep, profound pity, and that look seemed to hurt my father more than any punch ever could. That's when my mother decided to wake up. She fluttered her eyes open and scrambled to her feet. Her act of a delicate, fainting flower finished. Her approach was different. She didn't use anger. She used guilt, the tool she had sharpened on me my entire life. "Connie, honey," she cooed, rushing to my side and trying to wrap her arms around me. "You wouldn't kick your own parents out onto the street, would you? Think of everything we've done for you. We're family." I stepped away from her touch. Her words, which once would have broken my heart, now sounded hollow, like a song I'd heard too many times. I looked at the three of them. My raging father, my pleading mother, and my sobbing sister, who was still crumpled on the floor like a discarded napkin. This was my family. But the love I felt for them was tangled up with so much pain and so many lies that I couldn't find it anymore. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst? I felt a sudden, desperate need to breathe, to get away from the smell of dying flowers and broken promises. I turned to the only person in the room who felt safe. "Mr. Finch," I whispered. "Can we please go?" He simply nodded and placed a gentle protective hand on the small of my back, guiding me away. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving them standing there in the middle of the wreckage of Brianna's perfect day. The few remaining guests parted for us like we were walking on water. We passed the beautiful 5-tier wedding cake, untouched. We passed the gift table, piled high with presents for a marriage that was already over. Every step I took felt like I was walking away from my old life, and with every step I felt a little bit lighter. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We got into Mr. Finch's car. It wasn't a fancy, expensive car like I would have expected. It was an older, simple sedan, but it was spotless inside. It smelled like old books and peppermint. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the city lights blurring past the window. The quiet was a relief after all the screaming. Finally, I found the courage to ask the question that was burning in my mind. "Why?" I asked, turning to look at him. "Mr. Finch, I'm so grateful, but I don't understand. Why would you do all of this? For me?" He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel. A sad smile touched his lips. "Because you remind me of someone," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "A long time ago I had a daughter. Her name was Eleanor." He said her name like it was the most precious word in the world. An image of a kind, smiling girl popped into my head. I had a feeling this story was going to be the answer to everything, but it was also going to hurt. "She was like you," he continued, his voice growing thick with old sadness. "She worked so hard. She had a dream she was saving for. And she trusted people too easily, especially the people she loved." He took a deep breath. "She married a man who was charming and full of big ideas. He convinced her to give him her savings for an investment, a sure thing that was going to make them rich. She gave him everything just like you did. She believed in him." The story was so familiar it sent a shiver down my spine. My heart ached for him, for this secret pain he carried around every day. It was a pain I was beginning to understand. Had to know. "What happened?" I whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Mr. Finch was silent for a long moment. We stopped at a red light, and the car was completely still. "He lost it all," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Every penny. And the shame of what he had done, of how he had failed her. He couldn't face it. So he left. He just disappeared, leaving her with nothing but debt and a broken heart." I thought that was the end of the story, as tragic as it was. But as we started driving again, he added one more piece. It was the piece that changed everything. I tried to help her, of course. But I was too late. The stress and the heartbreak. She got sick. Very sick. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. He turned off the main road and onto a quiet, familiar street. My street. He pulled the car over to the curb, right in front of the little blue house on Maple Street. My house. He turned off the engine and looked at me, his eyes shining. "But that's not the only reason, Connie," he said. "The man my Eleanor married, the man who took her dreams and broke her heart. I knew his name, but I never knew where he went. Until your father walked into my office asking for a loan." The name hung in the quiet car. David Morales. My father. The man who told me bedtime stories and taught me how to ride a bike was the same man who had destroyed another girl's life and vanished. Didn't make sense. My mind felt like a TV switching channels too fast, showing 1,000 different pictures of my dad. Him cheering at my school play. Him helping me with my homework. Him looking at me with cold, angry eyes an hour ago. And now a new picture. A young man, a thief, a ghost running from a past I never knew existed. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It can't be. My dad. He's from here. He met my mom in high school." I was pleading, hoping Mr. Finch had made a terrible mistake. But the sad, certain look in his eyes told me he hadn't. He had spent years searching for this ghost, and the ghost had walked right into his office. The lies were deeper and older than I could have ever imagined. My whole life, my entire family history, was a story someone had made up. Who was I, if my own name was part of that lie? "He was good at starting over," Mr. Finch said gently, as if reading my mind. "When I finally hired a private investigator a few years ago, we found that he moved around a lot after he left Eleanor. He changed his story everywhere he went. By the time he met your mother, he had created a whole new history for himself. A history where he was a good man who just had some bad luck." It was true. My father always talked about his tough younger years, but never gave any details. He had built his new life on the rubble of his old one, and my mother, my sister, and I were the new foundation. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old, faded photograph. He handed it to me. It was a picture of a smiling young woman with kind eyes and hair the color of honey. She was standing next to a much younger version of my father. He had the same smile he used when he wanted something, the one that made you trust him instantly. It was a wedding photo. "That was my Eleanor," Mr. Finch said softly. "And that was David Morales, the day he promised to love and protect her." I stared at the photo, at the happy girl who looked so much like me. We were connected by the same man, the same lie, separated only by time. I thought about my mother. Did she know? Did she ever suspect that the man she married had a whole other life before her? Or was she a victim too, tricked by the same charming smile in that photograph? I remembered her always defending him, always making excuses for his bad moods and his secrets. "Your father's had a hard life," she would say. Maybe she knew something was wrong but was too scared to face it. Or maybe, just maybe, she helped him keep the secrets buried. The thought made me feel sick. "When your father walked into my office," Mr. Finch explained, "I almost didn't recognize him. He was older, of course. But when he said his name, it was like a ghost had walked in. I saw my daughter's face. I saw all the pain he caused." He looked out the window at my house. "At first, all I felt was anger. I wanted to destroy him. But then I started watching you, Connie. I saw how hard you worked. I saw how you gave everything to your family. And I saw them taking and taking, just like he took from Eleanor. And I knew. I couldn't let it happen again." He wasn't getting revenge. He was getting justice, but for me, not for him. He handed me a thick envelope. "This is the deed to the house. It's all in your name. Free and clear." I took it, my fingers trembling. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a second chance. It was the future his daughter never got to have. A place where a new dream, my dream, could finally be safe. "But what about my parents?" I whispered. "And Brianna? Where will they go?" Even after everything, a part of me still worried. It was a feeling I couldn't just turn off. "They have the $500,000 pension, Connie," he reminded me gently. "Or what's left of it. They can afford to find a new place to live. It is not your responsibility to take care of people who used you." He was right. I knew he was right. My father was not the man I thought he was, and my mother and sister were his willing helpers. It was time for me to save myself. I had to choose my own future over their comfort. I finally had to choose me. The silence returned to the car, but it was different now. It was filled with this new, terrible truth. The man who raised me was a monster in someone else's story. I had so many questions, but one stood out more than the others. "Mr. Finch," I began, my voice small. "Your daughter, Eleanor, you said she got sick. Is she?" I couldn't finish the sentence. I needed to know what happened to the girl in the picture. The girl whose life my father had stolen. Mr. Finch stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The air grew cold. "The doctors said it was a broken heart," he said, his voice raw with a pain that was still fresh, even after all these years. "She just gave up. She passed away 2 years after he left." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. For Eleanor. For the life she never got to live. But it was what he said next that made the blood in my veins run cold. "But he didn't just take her money and her will to live, Connie. When he disappeared, he took one more thing. Something I have spent 30 years trying to find." He finally turned to look at me. His eyes filled with a desperate, ancient grief. "He took their baby. My granddaughter. A granddaughter." The word echoed in the small car. Bigger than the house, bigger than the city. I did the math in my head, my hands trembling. Mr. Finch said it was 30 years ago. I was 28. The numbers were so close, they were practically touching. It was a crazy thought, a thought from a movie, not from a real life. But my life had stopped being real the moment Mr. Finch stood up at the wedding. A cold, terrifying question began to form in my mind. A question so huge I was scared to even think it. "Is it me? Do you have a picture of her?" I asked, my voice a tiny thread of sound. "The baby." Mr. Finch shook his head. His eyes filled with a deep sorrow. He took everything, Connie. Every picture, every birth certificate, every memory. He erased her, and he erased my granddaughter, as if they never existed. He didn't just steal money. He stole a person. He stole a history. He stole a little girl from her family, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sitting right there next to my own grandfather. We pulled up to the house. My house. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow, but the house didn't look welcoming. It looked like a crime scene. My father's truck and Brianna's car were parked haphazardly on the lawn. They were here. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. The key was still in my hand. I clutched it like a shield. Mr. Finch looked over at me. "Are you ready?" he asked. I wasn't. I don't think anyone could be ready for this. But I nodded anyway. It was time. We walked up the familiar stone path. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the sound of the bolt clicking open was the loudest sound in the world. We stepped inside. The living room was a disaster. Suitcases were thrown open, clothes spilling onto the floor. My mother was frantically pulling things out of closets while Brianna sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, her ruined wedding dress still on. My father was shouting into his phone, probably at a lawyer. Then he saw us. The shouting stopped. He hung up the phone. "Get out," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house." I held up the envelope Mr. Finch had given me, the deed inside. "It's not your house anymore, David," I said. Using his first name felt strange and powerful, like I was finally seeing him for who he was. Not my dad, just a man named David. His face hardened. He looked from me to Mr. Finch, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was trapped, and he knew it. My mother rushed over, her face blotchy from crying. "Connie, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "Don't do this. This is our home. We have nowhere else to go." Pulled my arm away. "You should have thought of that before you stole my life savings," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You should have thought of that before you lied to me every single day of my life." The words hurt her. I could see it in her eyes. But I wanted them to hurt. "You're a monster," Brianna screamed from the couch, finally snapping out of her trance. "You're a selfish monster. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you destroyed everything." I ignored her. Her words were like mosquito bites now, annoying but not truly painful. I walked right up to my father, to David, until I was standing so close I could see the fear in his eyes. He was a good liar, but he was a terrible coward. I was done with the money, done with the house. I needed the one thing he had left to steal: the truth. "Who was Eleanor Finch?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. My father flinched as if I had slapped him. My mother let out a tiny gasp. Brianna just looked confused, the name meaning nothing to her. The secret was finally out of the car and in the house, a poison that had been leaking under the floorboards for 30 years. David looked at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Mr. Finch stepped forward, his presence filling the small living room. "Don't lie to her anymore, David," he said, his voice heavy with grief and anger. "You owe her that much. You owe my daughter that much." My father shook his head, looking cornered. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy, old man." But his denial was weak, pathetic. He was drowning, and the lies were the water filling his lungs. I pulled the old photograph from my pocket, the one Mr. Finch had given me in the car. I held it up in front of his face. The smiling girl and the young, handsome thief. "Then explain this," I demanded. "Explain her. And then you can explain where her baby is. The baby girl you stole when you ran away. That's when it happened." My mother let out a loud, broken sob. It wasn't a sob of sadness. It was a sob of pure, gut-wrenching guilt. My father's eyes darted from me to Mr. Finch, then finally to my mother. He opened his mouth to speak, but her voice sliced through the tension first. David, don't, she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. Don't you dare tell her the rest of it. She'll never forgive us. The rest of it. I repeated, my voice shaking. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of poison. My mother looked at my father with pure terror in her eyes, as if she had just let the family monster out of its cage. For my entire life, I thought the biggest secret in this house was where Dad hid the Christmas presents. Now I knew this house wasn't built on love. It was built on a tiny, unmarked grave of secrets. And my mother was the one who had helped bury them. My father finally broke. He slumped onto the arm of the sofa, a man made of straw, all his stuffing pulled out. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at Mr. Finch. He just stared at the worn-out pattern on the rug. She got sick, he whispered, his voice raspy and thin. The baby. She had a fever that wouldn't break. I didn't have any money. Eleanor's money was gone. I panicked. I could see it in my mind. A scared young man, a crying baby, and a terrible choice. What did you do? Mr. Finch asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Every person in the room held their breath. This was the answer he had been waiting 30 years for. David finally lifted his head. His eyes empty and haunted. I drove for 2 days. I found a small town, a church with a light on. I wrapped her in a blanket, and I left her on the steps. I knocked on the door and I ran. I never looked back. The confession was ugly and simple. He hadn't raised her. He had thrown her away like a piece of trash. My legs gave out and I sank into a chair. The terrifying thought that I was the lost granddaughter vanished, and something much worse took its place. Had a sister, a half-sister. Somewhere out there was a woman who was part of me, a woman who started her life alone on the cold steps of a church because this man, our father, was a coward. The anger I felt was so hot it felt like it could melt my bones. He didn't just run away. He abandoned a sick child. And you, I said, turning to my mother, who was weeping silently. You knew. You knew all of this. She nodded, unable to speak, her face buried in her hands. David answered for her. I told her everything when we met. I was a mess. I told her I had made terrible mistakes. She said everyone deserved a second chance. She helped me build this life. She helped me forget. But they didn't forget. They just built walls around the truth. And they used my love and my trust as the bricks. Brianna made a choked sound from the couch. It was the first time I had looked at her since we came in. The anger was gone from her face, replaced by a hollow, broken expression. So my whole life, our whole family, it's all a lie, she whispered, looking at our parents as if they were strangers. Dad isn't Dad. We have another sister. The perfect world her parents had built for her, where she was the precious princess, had been a fairy tale all along. And the monster at the end of the story was her own father. I felt a strange, unexpected pang of pity for her. Her heartbreak was different from mine. I had lost my savings, my dream. She had lost her entire identity. I stood up and walked over to the old bookshelf. I pulled out one of the family photo albums. Its fake leather cover worn and soft. I opened it on the coffee table. There we were. Me and Brianna as kids, smiling with missing teeth. Our parents, younger, hugging us. It was all a performance. A play put on for the world. And we were the only actors who didn't know the script. All of these pictures, I said, my voice thick. All of these birthdays and holidays. All of this time there was a ghost in the room with us. A little girl you threw away. How could you smile for these pictures? How could you sleep at night? My mother looked up, her face a mess of tears and shame. I loved your father, she sobbed. I just wanted to build a family. I told myself that what was in the past was in the past. It was the worst excuse I had ever heard. Mr. Finch had been silent, absorbing the terrible news. His hope of finding his granddaughter alive and well had been replaced by the nightmare of a child abandoned. But he was a man who looked for solutions, not problems. What was the name of the town, David? He asked, his voice firm. What was the name of the church? My father shook his head. I don't know. I just drove. It was somewhere in Virginia, maybe. It was a long time ago. He was lying. Could see it. He was still trying to keep one last secret locked away. I slammed the photo album shut. The noise made everyone jump. Out, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I looked at David, at my mother, at Brianna. Pack one bag each. With your clothes. I want you out of my house in 1 hour. My mother started to protest. Connie, we have nowhere to go. But I held up my hand. That is not my problem anymore. You have money. Go find a hotel. Go find a new life to build on your lies. But you are not staying here. My father stood up then, a strange look on his face. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Fear. You don't understand, Connie, he said, his voice pleading. I did it to protect her. I had to leave her. It was the only way to keep her safe. Protect her. The words came out of my mouth like a puff of smoke, and they smelled like another lie. Protect her from what? From a fever. From a father who was supposed to love her. What could possibly be more dangerous than you? My father, David, looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of real desperation in his eyes. He was trying to find one last story, one last lie that would be big enough to save him, to make him a tragic hero instead of a villain. You don't understand, he said, standing up, trying to look strong again. It wasn't just the gambling. I got involved with some very bad people. I owed them a lot of money, more than I could ever repay. They threatened Eleanor. After she died, they said they would take the baby as payment. He painted a picture of dark alleyways and dangerous men, a world from a crime movie. He was trying to make himself sound like a victim, a man forced to make an impossible choice to save his child's life. He wanted us to feel sorry for him. But Mr. Finch was not a man who felt sorry for liars. He took a calm step forward. What were their names, David? He asked, his voice like steel. If your life was in danger, if my granddaughter's life was in danger, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you go to the police? A man running to save his child's life leaves a trail of evidence. A man running from his own shame just disappears. Every question was a perfect shot. And my father's story was riddled with holes, sinking fast. He had no answers. He just stood there, his lies falling apart around him. I turned my back on him. He was a lost cause. I looked at my mother, who was twisting her wedding ring around and around on her finger. She was the keeper of the secrets. She was the one who knew the real story. Mom, I said, and my voice was soft but firm. Look at me. Stop protecting him. For once in your life, protect your daughter. Protect me. Is he telling the truth? Her eyes darted from my father to me. Her face a war between fear and guilt. For 30 years she had chosen him. Now she had to choose. And finally she broke. A lifetime of lies came pouring out in a flood of tears. No, she cried out, the word tearing from her throat. No, it's not true. There were no bad men, not like that. It was just bookies. Men he owed a few $1,000s to from betting on horses. He was just ashamed. He couldn't handle being a father alone, being poor. He didn't save her, Connie. He just didn't want her anymore. The truth was so much uglier and smaller than the lie. He hadn't been a tragic hero. He had been a pathetic, selfish boy who ran away from his responsibilities. Brianna let out a gasp. She finally stood up from the couch, her face a pale, ghostly white under the living room lights. She walked over to David, our father, and looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. You threw away a baby, she whispered, her voice full of a disgust so deep it made me shiver. You threw away your own daughter because you were embarrassed. Because you lost some bets on a horse race. He couldn't even look at her. He had been her hero, her perfect dad, and now she saw him for the worm he really was. Mr. Finch's face was like stone. All emotion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. He had his answer. He knew the kind of man he was dealing with. One last time, David. Give me the name of the town. My father just shook his head, looking at the floor. It was the last piece of power he had left in the world, the name of that place, and he was clinging to it. But he had forgotten about my mother. He had forgotten that she had her own secrets. Hopewood, my mother said, her voice suddenly clear and strong. Everyone turned to look at her. The town was called Hopewood, Virginia. It was on a map he left in his coat. St. Jude's Church for Foundlings. She looked directly at Mr. Finch, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman she might have been before all the lies. I never told him I found it. Kept it. Just in case. It was her one single act of rebellion in a lifetime of going along with his story. The fight was over. There was nothing left to say. Go, I said, pointing to the door. Silently, they gathered their bags. My mother, my father, and Brianna, a family of strangers, walked out of my house. Brianna didn't go with them. She turned left at the end of the driveway while they turned right. They didn't even notice. The Morales family was officially broken. I stood at the door and watched them go, then closed it, the click of the lock echoing in the empty, silent house. Mr. Finch was already on his phone, talking in a low voice, hiring people, starting the search. I walked through the quiet rooms, my footsteps loud on the hardwood floors. The house felt huge and empty. I had won. Had my house back. Had my life back. But I felt a deep, aching sadness. I wandered into my parents' old bedroom. It smelled like my father's aftershave and my mother's perfume. I opened her closet and saw a small wooden box tucked away on the top shelf. It wasn't a jewelry box. It was plain, old, and locked with a tiny key. I found the key in a little dish on her dresser. Opened the box. Inside there was no secret treasure. There was just a folded, yellowed piece of newspaper. It was from the Hopewood County Gazette. The headline made my blood run cold. Fire at St. Jude's Orphanage. All children safe except one unidentified infant. And my mother's voice echoed in my head, confessing one last thing as she walked out the door, a final secret she whispered only to me. He lied to me about the church, Connie. He told me later he took her to the orphanage instead. He said it would be safer there. The newspaper clipping lay on the coffee table between us, a yellowed, brittle tombstone for a life that never had a chance. All children safe except one unidentified infant. The words were so cold, so final. Mr. Finch stared at the paper. His face completely blank. The 30-year search was over. He had found his answer, and the answer was a grave. I watched as the hope that had filled his eyes just hours before drained away, leaving behind a grief so deep it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He had fought so hard, only to find the worst kind of ending. But then my mother's last words to me whispered back into my mind. He said it would be safer there. Why the orphanage? Why not the church? And why lie to her about it? It was one lie too many. I picked up the fragile piece of paper. The fire happened 2 weeks after the date my father would have arrived. Mr. Finch, I said, my voice quiet but sure. My father is a coward. But he's also a survivor. He runs from trouble. What if he wasn't just abandoning her? What if he was hiding her? It was a tiny spark of hope in a very dark room, but it was all we had left. The next morning we were in his car, driving south toward Virginia. The silence was different this time. It wasn't the awkward silence of a boss and his employee, or the heavy silence of grief. It was the quiet, determined silence of two people on a mission. We weren't a family by blood, but we were connected by something stronger, a shared piece of a broken heart. As we drove, I saw the world outside the window differently. The trees, the sky, the small towns we passed through. It all looked brighter, more full of possibility. I was no longer just Connie Morales, the invisible sister. I was a woman searching for a ghost, and I wasn't going to stop until I found her. Hopewood, Virginia, was a small, sleepy town that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. The old St. Jude's orphanage was just a pile of bricks overgrown with weeds. At the town hall, A kind, elderly clerk with glasses perched on her nose listened to our story. "Oh, I remember the fire," she said, her voice sad. "It was a terrible tragedy. And yes, I remember the poor baby girl who was lost. She had been left at the church just a few weeks before. A little thing with a terrible fever." Mr. Finch closed his eyes. It was true. The end of the line. But then the clerk frowned, tapping her chin. "But you know, it's funny. I always thought the report was wrong about her being in the fire." Mr. Finch's eyes snapped open. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Well," she said, "that baby was so sick when they found her, they took her straight to the county hospital, not the orphanage. And there was a young nurse there, a lovely woman named Sarah who couldn't have children of her own. She fell in love with that baby. Insisted on adopting her herself. They rushed the paperwork through before the baby was even out of the hospital. She was never, not for one day, inside that orphanage." My heart stopped. Mr. Finch grabbed my hand, his grip like iron. "What was the nurse's name?" he choked out. The clerk smiled, a beautiful, brilliant smile. "Sarah Patterson. Her husband was a teacher. They moved out west not long after the adoption to Arizona, I think. Said they wanted to give their little girl, whom they named Angela, the sun, moon, and stars." Angela. Angel. She wasn't a ghost. She was a daughter. She was alive. For the first time I saw Mr. Finch cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, impossible joy. 6 months later, the little blue house on Maple Street didn't smell like secrets anymore. It smelled like sugar and cinnamon. I stood behind the counter of my own bakery, Eleanor and Angela's, a framed picture of the two smiling sisters, one in an old photo, one in a new one, on the wall. Mr. Finch, who I now called Alistair, sat at a small table by the window, reading a letter. He was a different man, lighter and 10 years younger. He had met his granddaughter, Angela. He had met his great-grandchildren. His broken family was starting to heal. As for my old family, they were scattered. My father had disappeared again, running from his new set of problems. My mother was living with her sister a few states away, sending me letters I never opened. And Brianna. She had called me once, crying, apologizing. She was working a normal job, living in a small apartment. She was starting over, trying to find out who she was without the lies. I wished her peace. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about saving myself. And in the process we had saved someone else too. My story started with humiliation at a wedding, with a secret that was meant to break me. But it ended here, in a warm bakery, with a truth that set an entire family free. My life is proof that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how many people try to dim your light, you can always, always build your own dream. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the broken pieces and start again. If my story has moved you, if you believe in the power of truth and the hope of a new beginning, please, from the bottom of my heart, show your support. It would mean the world to me. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, and subscribe to the channel. Because every single one of you deserves to have your dream come true too.